We have reported to you this morning that the White House has announced that the United States is planning to send some more Patriot, effective against Scud missiles, U.S. anti-missile missiles to Israel. For more on that and other White House reactions, CNN correspondent Frank says now. Morning, Frank.
Good morning, Bob. Well, the chief concern at the White House and throughout the Bush administration is to try to reassure Israel that the U.S. and coalition forces are doing everything they can to eliminate the remaining Scud missile sites in western Iraq that are threatening the Jewish state. And the U.S. is trying to put some muscle where its mouth is. It is, as you say, sending more Patriot missile batteries to Israel. They are, according to one diplomatic source, en route or have already arrived. So this promise was clearly made some time ago. Overnight, President Bush talked to Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir again shortly after 3 a.m. this morning. According to White House spokesman Marlon Fitzwater, the president again expressed his concern at the most recent attack that Israel has come under from Iraq and pledged to do what the U.S. could to eliminate those Scud sites in western Iraq. We are told that there was early this morning a fresh wave of U.S. bombing runs seeking to locate and destroy the remaining mobile missile launchers in western Iraq. They're very hard to find. Military officials saying yesterday it's like finding a needle in a haystack. We're told by some sources that about half the mobile missile launchers have been taken out. That's the good news. Obviously, the bad news is about half remain, although it's questionable as to just how many of them are operational or precisely what their location is. Clearly concerned about this whole situation. The White House continues to monitor it, as does the president. He will be receiving a briefing from Pentagon briefers today up at Camp David, the presidential retreat where he is spending the weekend. On hand will be Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell, the Vice President, and the National Security Advisor. It is, as you can see, a beautiful day here in Washington, very mild, very clear, very quiet, belying the very noisy Operation Storm that continues to carry on in the Persian Gulf. Bob?
Frank, on another matter, we understand you are getting word there in Washington today that may impinge on whether the forthcoming U.S.-Soviet summit will go ahead as scheduled.
Well, what is happening is that we are hearing that a Soviet team is going to be coming to the U.S. Probably this weekend to conduct discussions with Undersecretary of State Reginald Bartholomew, principally to focus on a START treaty. Francis Hardin reports from the State Department that officials there say that this will also touch upon problems with the conventional arms treaty already signed. It is not specifically a summit planning session, and officials say the summit remains pretty much where it's been all along. It still is scheduled for February 11th to 13th in Moscow, but Marlon Fitzwater said last week it was up in the air because of the situation in the Baltics. We're told by diplomatic sources that the summit, Bob, per se, was not discussed between President Bush and Gorbachev in a 45-minute phone conversation they had yesterday, though the START treaty, which also is encountering some problems, was the president encouraging Gorbachev to get both sides moving down the road to resolve the remaining problems so the START treaty and presumably the summit, if all things remain quiet, can take place.
Frank, this is just a little arcane, but briefly, has anyone there given you any word how long it takes to get these Patriot missiles the U.S. is shipping to Israel operational?
I've asked about that. I suppose the better place to go to get a more precise answer would be over to the Pentagon. I'm sure Gene Randall has some information or could find some on that. I understand that some Patriot batteries have been in Israel for a while and are not yet operational. So the presumption is it does take some time. Precisely how much, I don't know. I think what this latest shipment shows is, first of all, some resolve on the part of President Bush and the United States to continue to show Israel that it is standing by and staying defensive, and it's a symbolic show largely.
Frank says no, thank you. Bobby?
Let's stay in Washington and get some further comments, or New York rather. We're going to go to New York and get some further comments and analysis from former Assistant Secretary of State Richard Murphy. Mr. Murphy is a former U.S. ambassador to Syria and a former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asian Affairs. He is currently with the Council on Foreign Relations as a senior fellow for the Middle East. Good morning.
Good morning.
You are, as we say, a former Assistant Secretary of State, and from a State Department perspective, is the United States approaching and dealing with this conflict in the best and most effective way at this point?
Well, the State Department's role is now secondary to that of the Pentagon. I think what I hope is going on in State is planning for the future, for the post-war situation. Obviously, they have to maintain diplomatic communications with the coalition worldwide, etc. But I hope that the effort is going on in policy planning in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs to look ahead. What sort of region do we hope can come out of this?
Are you at all surprised, knowing what you know about the Middle East, by Iraq's response to this attack, or is it going as you would have anticipated?
I've been surprised by Iraq's position for some time now. The fact that it drove against Arab world opinion in invading and annexing Kuwait in the first place, and that it didn't look for any way out of the confrontation with ourselves, with the coalition as the forces built up in Saudi Arabia.
As we talk about the multinational force and the alliance created there and what might happen after this conflict, let's first deal directly with the alliance itself. Egypt and Syria have both said that Israel has the right to retaliate, indicating that they will stick with the coalition. Syria's maybe in question, but Egypt seems like we might be able to count on them. Do you believe that will happen?
Coalition is not threatened at in the present context. The Syrian position is perhaps more open to question than the Egyptian, but Syria is not going to fall into Saddam's game, being pulled into the conflict by an announced deliberate provocation by the Iraqis of Israel.
I feel like we may never really see peace in this region. Do you agree that at best we might see a new balance of power?
Well, there will be a new balance of power, but I think there's no reason to give up hope that there can be certainly a more stable situation than has prevailed in the Near East for the last several years. And the idea of the hope to look forward to peace treaties, new arrangements between Israel and its Arab neighbors, I think it's certainly out there. There's no reason to give up that hope.
What do you foresee happening then when this conflict is over, in terms of the political changes, the geographical changes that might be a result?
Well, first of all, let me say that right now we're all fixated on the high technology, these magnificent achievements of the fighting men and women in the combat zone and the pictures of all this equipment that has been deployed there. But when those pictures fade, we ought to be thinking about how did this region get so crammed with such equipment on both sides of the line? First of all, in Iran and Iraq, and today we're watching it between Kuwait, the coalition, and Iraq, and there's always the Arab-Israeli situation. We should be looking forward to a period when we can tackle arms reduction, arms control talks in the region. How this can be pursued independent of a political peace process is an open question at the moment, but I hope our public and the publics in the region give a moment's thought now, in the middle of the combat, to how did we get here, and isn't it a good idea to try to find some way, some formula to reduce the arms to a more tolerable level, a less volatile level.
Well, let me throw a couple of scenarios at you. What happens if the Allied forces get what might be termed as a total victory? If Saddam loses Kuwait, but he stays in power?
If he loses Kuwait quickly and stays in power, he will probably be humiliated and perhaps not stay in power all that long. If he is able to extend the combat through the use of his ground forces in deeply dug-in positions in Kuwait, each day that he stays in a combat with us, he wins. And he enters Arab legend as a greater and greater figure of the man who stood down, faced down the outside world.
What about a possible limited victory?
A limited victory by the coalition?
Yes. If he begins, say, a slow withdrawal.
Well, a partial withdrawal is no victory for us. It's not there is no partial victory there. There must be a complete withdrawal, because that gives him a superb hand to play in the next political round if he stays in part of Kuwait, such as those islands in the northern oil fields. We would have to, at a minimum, keep both the arms embargo imposed on Kuwait worldwide. We would have to keep the oil embargo so that he picks up no cash with which to replenish his arms or to supply the spare parts for his industry.
What happens if there is a change of power, let's say, within Kuwait, maybe a military coup, and we end up with someone who is just as difficult to deal with or worse?
You will not end up with someone who is just as difficult to deal with or worse. Saddam Hussein has spent 20 years consolidating a remarkable cult of personality. He will be, if he is succeeded by someone even within his ruling circle, they will not have the power to demand the response from the Iraqi public that he has achieved over the last several years. There is no second Saddam. They have been disposed of.
So win or lose, really, Saddam Hussein remains a force to be reckoned with, doesn't he, in terms of future Arab policy and oil policies, too?
Alive or dead, he remains a force to be reckoned with. Whether he's in or out of power, whether he survives or not, he has challenged the West. He has challenged the United States in particular. And as I say, the longer that challenge succeeds and he remains in Kuwait, he remains in power in Baghdad, then the greater his image is going to be, and the sense of excitement and almost romantic exhilaration will continue in the Arab world. In the streets, at least, not among the leadership.
Richard Murphy, as a former Assistant Secretary of State, thank you very much for joining us today.
As we have reported to you, Iraq is ordering all international journalists to leave the country, and that includes Peter Arnett, CNN's only correspondent still there. Arnett talked with Patrick Emery shortly after the order overnight. We remind you that Arnett was being watched and listened to by Iraqi officials as he spoke.
We've restored CNN's communications with the outside world from Baghdad, as you can hear, but it may be the final report because all of the international press corps here has been ordered to leave Iraq. We're in the third day of the air war directed against the Iraqi capital and elsewhere in Iraq and Kuwait by the multinational Armada. The frequent airstrikes against Baghdad continued overnight. The destruction is gradually altering the skyline of the Iraqi capital. Traffic in the streets of the city today seems mainly official vehicles. Most of the population is either staying indoors or already they've evacuated to safer locations in the country. The Minister of Information, Latif Jassin, last night met with the nearly 40 members of the International Press Corps and asserted that Iraq is confident it can withstand the multinational air assault and eventually win victory. The minister was relaxed as he spoke with reporters. He asserted that what he called the electronic war launched against Iraq by President Bush will not succeed. He said that President Bush is, quote, under the illusion that he can score a quick and easy victory against Iraq with such tactics, unquote. The Iraqi official said that President Bush has not reckoned with the Iraqi people's willingness to fight with faith in God, he said, and faith in Saddam Hussein. Now, this morning, orders have come for the press corps to depart from Baghdad, and as of now, they're starting to dismantle the satellite communications. As this report, the nearly 40 journalists here are packing their bags and assembling cars for the trip to the Jordanian border. This is Peter Arnett, CNN, reporting live from Baghdad.
Peter, I know it's delicate. Can I ask you a question?
It all depends. Ask the question and I'll see if I can answer it.
All right, good enough. Let me start with this one. We reported that you may be allowed to return in 3 to 5 days. Why 3 to 5 days?
The Ministry of Information is saying that conditions in the hotel are not adequate for the press, that the hygienic conditions are poor, the water is limited, and they feel that it'll take some time to organize the locale here, organize the hotel to make it for this number of journalists to stay here. That is the reason they're giving. I have no other information about why it would be that period of time for us to return.
Can you tell, would it be all right for you to describe the scene in Baghdad right now? What does the city look like?
Hello? Well, as I said in my dispatch, the city remains quiet. There has been no panic here. From what we can see, there have been no civilian targets hurt by the bombing. Now, in the hotel, the press corps, I think, is generally disappointed that it is required to leave. We had basically settled down here. We'd learned to live with the danger, and we seemed happy enough, well, the colleagues that I know, to try to cover the Iraqi side of what's going on. This decision by the Iraqi government to send us out of the country was unexpected, and I think we are reluctant to go, but it looks as though we have no choice.
We believe that may be the last report we hear from Peter Arnett. He and the rest of the CNN news crew in Baghdad have been ordered out of the country, as have all Western journalists. We're standing by now for a news conference from the man we have described as the man in the middle in the Persian Gulf crisis, Jordan's King Hussein. We're looking at pictures of what appears to be a journalist-packed conference room in Amman. King Hussein is expected to arrive here shortly, and when he begins his news conference, we'll bring you live coverage as our coverage of war in the Gulf continues.
A reminder once again that we are standing by live in Amman, where Jordan's King Hussein will face the press momentarily, and we will bring that to you live when it happens. Bush administration officials say the United States will provide Israel with more Patriot air defense missiles. The Patriots are capable of shooting down Iraqi Scud missiles like those that have hit Israel today and yesterday. A White House spokesman says President Bush was on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir regarding the Iraqi missile attack this morning. CNN's Jennifer Michael has details on this latest attack.
Strike 2. Iraqi missiles slam into the Tel Aviv area just as they did the day before. Israeli military officials say several missiles landed in a conventional, not a chemical attack. Baghdad radio claims 11 missiles were launched at what it calls the enemy. Israel did not respond to the first Iraqi attack, but Israeli officials say they will this time, despite U.S. fears that an Israeli strike might prompt Arab nations to break from the coalition against Iraq.
Now, in the last few hours, we've heard statements, official statements, by a representative of Egypt, a key member of the coalition, a representative of Syria, another key member of the coalition. And each one of them said that if Israel is attacked, then Israel obviously has the right to respond, and that they would not be involved in that response.
But Syria's information minister is quoted as saying his country will fight alongside any Arab nation attacked by Israel. Jordan's crown prince is worried about his nation being caught in the crossfire.
We could become the killing ground simply because we are in the neighborhood of this laboratory of advanced technology and highly sophisticated weaponry.
U.S. and allied forces have been trying to prevent new Iraqi attacks on Israel by trying to destroy Baghdad's mobile Scud missiles. Britain reports a success in that mission. It says its warplanes have found previously undetected Scud missile sites in Iraq, and they're attacking them. On another front, airports around the world have been tightening security in case Iraq launches terrorist attacks against U.S. and allied targets. Now there's a warning from the United States of a credible threat involving possible terrorist action in Bangkok, Thailand, within the next 48 hours. U.S. officials are offering a military airlift for Americans who want to get out of the northern Persian Gulf region. And in Beirut, Lebanon, the U.S. embassy staff has been evacuated because of security concerns. As Baghdad is bombarded by allied forces, Iraq broadcast an appeal urging Muslims to attack Western interests worldwide. The Baghdad radio statement said, "The time has come to crush the enemy and erase the disgrace." Jennifer Michael, CNN, reporting.
U.S. Marines in Saudi Arabia are preparing for possible ground attacks by Iraqi forces. Linda Patillo has this pool report on their reactions to the air battle already underway.
Throughout the morning, fighter jets continued to head north overhead. Navy corpsmen at two 150-bed field hospitals rushed to finish operating rooms and prepared to treat any casualties from an Iraqi counterattack. Marines tuned shortwave radios into any reports they could find. For the Marines here, the war began hours before dawn with the sound of squadrons of fighter jets flying overhead.
I was awake at 04 this morning when we heard the birds going over. We saw flashes over there in the horizon. We had a pretty good idea something was going down. We didn't know before that. And my personal reaction is I'm glad we're finally getting it started. I believe personally that we didn't need to keep waiting. We gave him his chance. He didn't move. Now it's the U.S.'s turn to go ahead and run with the ball.
What was the reaction of people that you were with when you heard the birds going over, as you said?
Everybody who was with me had the same idea.
It was about 3 o'clock this morning. that I could hear a lot of planes going over continuously for a while, and then about 5 o'clock had a trouble call come in, and that's when I was told that they started the bombing, and go outside, take a look, and you can see them doing their job. Very, very proud of them.
Early this morning, I heard the ground shake a little bit, so I woke up and realized what was going on. In a way, it was a little scary, but it's pretty good news. You know, our air's taking over like that.
There are fears this huge forward supply center could be a target for Iraqi counterattack. Marines spent the day digging in. As long as the battle continues in the air, they can only wait for news and prepare for the call that the ground troops are moving in. This is Linda Patillo with the Marines in Saudi Arabia.
We reported to you a short while ago, in fact, just moments ago, you heard CNN correspondent Peter Arnett's report from Baghdad prior to his ejection, along with that of other Western journalists from that country. The other 2 CNN reporters who were covering the Persian Gulf War from Baghdad now are in Jordan. They got to Amman last night. They talked with CNN's David French, recounting some of their experiences in Baghdad.
Bernie, there are a few happy moments in wartime. This is a very happy moment for the personal CNN family. God bless you. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, David. It is very good for us to be back, but we are aware that there are 3 CNN staffers still on the ground, still at ground zero in Baghdad. Peter Arnett, Nick Robertson, and Robert Weiner, the executive producer. And I must tell you that as we hugged each other and said goodbye this morning, John, you could see a feeling in their eyes, and
there was concern. Obviously, they were happy that we were able to leave, Bernie. But by the same token, they knew that CNN had to be represented in Baghdad for us to continue to attempt to cover this story. In case you're wondering why we left, the officials in Iraq would not let us do our job anymore. The communication circuit that we used to report to you the night of the first bombardment, and for the following couple of days, we were ordered not to use that at one point late in the day yesterday, and
now there are censorship restrictions, and they frankly are working under a handicap, but work they will as long as they can. I should tell our viewers, John, that we are going to be very circumspect, very conservative in our remarks about what we saw, what we heard, and what we felt, because there's still journalists there, and we don't want to do anything whatsoever to undercut them by saying anything that the Iraqi government would consider provocative or sensitive to their sense of national security.
Bernie, I imagine the best thing for us to do for our viewers, and others along the network line may have their own ideas about this, but is to talk about some of the pictures that we brought back with us. This is the view out of our CNN bureau in Baghdad, just looking out. There were still some lights on in the city of Baghdad at the beginning of the air raid. The Iraqis had several practices in weeks before about how to do a complete blackout. But, well, you can see what happened. These pictures were taken just a few minutes after that blackout using a night scope camera, we believe, that Fabrice Moussas, the cameraman for ABC, was able to use. And you can see the tracer fire going up into the air there, one after the other. The tracers went up, but with every one that you could see like that, there are either 5 or 10 bullets that you can't see. So the anti-aircraft guns were really going wild, trying to hit the Allied coalition planes.
And what is deadly about what you're seeing and hearing is that for every round you see going in the air, it obviously has to come down. And one does not know how many Baghdadis were wounded or killed by anti-aircraft fire that returned to Earth once it had expired in its trajectory. On the streets of Baghdad, people just scampering, scurrying, trying to run for cover.
The sky was lit up like the 4th of July, Bertie. We mentioned this several times the night of this in our live coverage. It was, you know, it looked like a terrific fireworks show, but obviously these were fireworks that had death connected to them in some way.
What was going on with all those knocks you had on the door? You had people coming to the door a lot. Who were they?
Sure, David. In the middle of the night, at one point, there were hotel security people who said it was their job to get us out of there and down into the bomb shelters down on the in the sub-basement of the hotel. And we obviously didn't want to do that. We wanted to be where we could find out from you what was going on and where we could report to you.
Look at the horizon on your screen. What you're watching there, in many instances, are the explosions of the bombs as they're hitting. And this sound, these sirens, are very eerie. Throughout the last 3 days, John, in Baghdad, in broad daylight, I have slept in my clothes for the last 2 days.
Absolutely. I remember, Bernie, I was on the communication system with CNN, and you had been on it for about 20 hours straight. You'd go down to lie down and get a little sleep, and another siren would come, some more anti-aircraft fire would come, and these huge, loud explosions out in the distance would occur. That's a revolving restaurant, by the way, that you saw there. It looks a little bit like a mushroom lit up by the blast of a bomb in the background.
Is that Peter saying this is it?
No, I think that's footage from another network. That's their reporter, I believe, or maybe
okay.
One of their people out there. But you can see the sky lit up there with the anti-aircraft fire going up. We thought at the time we saw some aluminum or chaff that was put out by the American or the Allied planes
to jam radar,
to confuse the radar
and electronics. Yeah. Now that was a big hit there. That was a big hit.
You and I was standing in the window when that blast occurred, and I was forced back from the window. The viewers who were listening to that were probably worried about me.
And I hit the deck.
Yes.
There was video today from the Pentagon, gentlemen, showing the effectiveness of some of that right through a slit in the roof of one of the buildings. We heard
about that video.
Just outstanding stuff. Your trip across the desert today, how long was it? I'm not going to ask you what you saw, but how long was it? Were you ever in any danger?
I don't think we were ever in any danger. We left about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It is now nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, so it took more than, I guess, 14 hours to get to this point from the time that we left.
As you two could well imagine, it was an awful moment for all of us, too. And I'd like to ask you, Bernie, because we lost track of it for a while, what you can tell us about what happened then, where you went, what you did.
Say that again, David. I didn't understand the last part.
Well, back here, we sort of lost track of you when you signed off. We had no way of knowing if everything was all right, and you're aware of that. Fill us in on where you went and what you did.
Well, it occurs to me what David French is asking us about is how we spent last night. We spent 12 hours in a bomb shelter last night at the hotel where we stayed with elderly people, crying babies, husbands, wives, widows, widowers, and I would roughly estimate there were about 300 or 400 people there in 2 different bomb shelters. And what really made me angry was that I went to the men's room, and when I came back, this French woman, you remember the little old lady on the other side of the door?
Yeah.
When I walked back, she was sitting right in my place. And I looked at her, and obviously you're not going to tell an old lady in a bomb shelter, you're in my spot, you have to move. So that's why I moved out into the hallway, and I sat on that.
You were trying to sleep in a chair like this for hours and hours.
So, that's where we were last night.
Shaw and Holloman also recounted that during the course of their journey from Baghdad to Amman, their convoy was stopped about 16 times by Iraqi security forces. As our coverage of war in the Gulf continues, there are 2 events to which we are looking forward. Program notes we remind you of. In Amman, Jordan, King Hussein expected a short time from now to arrive in a crowded press center to hold a news conference. We expect to bring you live coverage of that. Also, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Joint Command has scheduled its daily military briefing. It had been scheduled for 10 o'clock Eastern Time today. It has been pushed back half an hour now scheduled for 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, we expect to bring you live coverage of that. Our coverage of war in the Gulf continues.
Well, as we continue to monitor events in the Persian Gulf War, we also continue to monitor other networks around the world. And to that end, we bring you this report from ITN's Mark Austin, filed from Bahrain, which we received several moments ago.
British Jaguar planes back from a dawn raid on Iraqi targets in Kuwait. Every aircraft that went on this sortie returned, and more missions will be flown throughout the day. The targets, surface-to-air missile sites, and particularly Scud missile launchers. Senior officers say the Allied search for Scuds has taken on a new importance.
We know of some more launch sites, unfortunately, because of the 3 that were launched against Israel this morning. But yes, we are finding more and attacking them as we find them.
Unlike tornadoes, single-seater Jaguars only strike in daylight. The pilots can see the target, but the enemy can also see them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've ever seen tracer and stuff coming at me in AAA, but it certainly concentrates the mind a little. It's the longest minute of my life, I can tell you.
Certainly a fairly frightening experience.
Nothing can prepare you for it, so it's not it's difficult to say. It's pretty just a lot of stuff going in there, and it looks pretty messy on the ground, so not very nice.
Yeah, it's quite impressive actually, watching it all go off, clicking off underneath me, but after that I was more worried about running away bravely.
As soon as the planes land, more 1,000-pound bombs are loaded by the ground crew.
Well, makes my job worthwhile a bit really, doesn't it? I put them on, they take them off. Got my screwdriver? Yeah.
And for the pilots who finally drop them, a satisfaction in hitting the target.
Bloody great, I'll tell you. Bloody great.
Once they've landed, these Jaguars can be rearmed, refueled and ready to go up again in less than an hour. As the search for Scud sites intensifies and the bombardment continues, the Jaguars face a busy war. Mark Austin, ITN, with the RAF in Bahrain.
As the war continues, demonstrators across the nation raised their voices on both sides of the war issue. 2 among the demonstrations yesterday, one in Chicago, where about 250 people staged an anti-war rally in front of the Board of Trade. They chanted, beat on drums, and denounced U.S. involvement in the Gulf conflict. Just as vocal were about 60 people who gathered on the Whittier College campus in California in a show of support for U.S. troops in the Gulf. They chanted USA and burned Iraqi President Saddam Hussein in effigy.
The war in the Gulf is causing special concerns for Arab Americans. CNN's Sean Caleb reports on their reactions to the fighting.
There's no shortage of phone calls. This radio broadcast from New York is called Arabesque, allowing its audience, mostly Arab Americans, to voice opinions. The discussion zeroes in on the Gulf War.
You're not behind the president, then?
I'm not behind this action. No, I'm not.
Many callers don't support the U.S. action. Others target Saddam Hussein.
If we let, and excuse my French, if we let that bastard walk all over us now, it affects the entire world for a lot of years to come. And thank God for what they're doing right now.
But every time Allied fighter jets streak toward their target, and every bomb blast in Iraq hits home with many Arab Americans.
They are watching, fearfully watching, the disaster occurring in their eyes, in front of their eyes, and there is nothing that they can do.
This man's father is from Iraq.
So he's very, very upset about it. He badly wanted for the U.S. not to go ahead and take a first strike against Iraq.
And now some Arab Americans, like this man in California, are experiencing hostilities.
I have been personally, and my wife have been exposed to the hatred feelings among the Americans here. And, you know, it's not a very good feeling.
Security at mosques around the U.S. has been increased. Arab anti-discrimination organizations say hate crimes against people of Arab descent are increasing. Many come here seeking solace and peace of mind. Many others are praying for peace on earth.
I feel strongly that civilians must not be attacked, whether they are in Israel or they are in Kuwait or they are in Iraq or they are in the United States. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Some are thinking about Saddam Hussein. They believe he is carrying the torch for the Palestinians and back the Iraqi leader with heart and soul.
I support Saddam Hussein 100%. Whatever he do, he's standing up for the Palestinian people.
Still others try not to choose a side. They just hope and pray the bloodshed ends soon. Sean Caleb, CNN, reporting.
Our coverage of the Gulf War continues right after this.
The United States is trying to keep Israel out of the war and the anti-Iraq alliance united. After a second Iraqi attack on Israel, President Bush talked by telephone with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and thanked him for the restraint shown so far by the Israelis. The White House spokesman confirms that the U.S. also is providing Israel with more Patriot missiles. They are the ones that are capable of shooting down Iraqi Scud missiles. Iraq launched several missiles at Israel overnight, but officials there called damage minimal and injuries slight. Several Israeli cabinet ministers say Israel will respond to the attacks. They just don't say when or how. In the meantime, the multinational forces continue pounding Baghdad and Iraqi missile sites. U.S. pilots say the Iraqis are mounting a more vigorous defense now than during the initial strikes, but heavy Allied bombardment has knocked out telephone communications, electricity, and water supplies in the city of Baghdad. And the military spokesman in Riyadh announced a short while ago that 12 Iraqi prisoners of war have been captured. A U.S. frigate, U.S. Army helicopters, and a Kuwaiti patrol boat took part in the action against Kuwaiti oil platforms occupied by Iraqis in the North Arabian Sea.
One of the more difficult parts of war coverage is keeping a running total on the number of casualties and lost equipment. As we look at these graphics right here, there are a total of 8 planes that have been missing from the Allied attack on Iraq, 4 United States jets, and those include 1 F-18 Hornet, 2 A-6 Intruders, and 1 F-15E Eagle attack jet. There are 7 missing pilots from those downed jets. Britain has lost 2 planes. One we know for sure was a Tornado, and they are missing 4 pilots. Italy has lost 1 plane, 2 pilots are missing, and Kuwait has lost 1 plane, and 1 pilot is missing.
Let us look at some of the domestic editorial comment on the Persian Gulf War, editorials appearing in American newspapers this day. From the San Francisco Chronicle, no world order worth living will be built on a foundation of humiliation, hatred, and division. For our children's sake, let us hope that our methods of pursuing worthy short-term goals do not poison the future. From the Detroit Free Press, these words: the Gulf War ultimately could make the Middle East a less perilous place. But it also could have the opposite effect if the New World Order is distorted by an over-reliance on military responses to political problems. And from the Los Angeles Times, the current protests are the product not of a nation divided, but of a society that is sufficiently self-confident to accommodate differing political views. King Hussein of Jordan now has taken the rostrum. He's about to begin a news conference in Amman. Let's listen.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, I must apologize for having been inaccessible to many of my friends here who have asked to see me during the last few days. But I felt it important to have this opportunity to do so now and to say how much we appreciate your being with us during these very difficult times. And this phase of the life of the world and our region, which I believe will have a great impact on the future of people here in this region and in the world as a whole. I am pleased that my brother, the Crown Prince, has been able to meet with many of you and to answer your questions. And I'm happy that you are with us here. I hope to the best of our ability that we will make you feel at home and amongst your friends. In this very serious crisis, I believe the media has played a role that was unprecedented in any that the world has passed through in the past. The crisis itself, in terms of the point that we have reached now, is at the very beginning of what we strove, myself, the government, and the people of Jordan, to avert and avoid from the very outset. You will recall my involvement in the first few days of the crisis, that we secured an Iraqi commitment to withdrawal from Kuwait and positive response to attend a mini Arab summit in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to resolve the causes and reasons that brought about the events of the 2nd of August of last year, against the background of the problem that was first discussed at the Arab Summit in Baghdad. Unfortunately, every attempt and every effort to secure progress towards a peaceful solution to the problem with which I was involved was blocked and was scuttled, and escalation grew with the resolution adopted by the foreign ministers at the Arab League, the Security Council's involvement, and the arrival of troops to the region. And the story since then is well known to you. We have tried our utmost, and with any glimmer of hope, we would try again. This area has suffered for long, suffered injustice, and the people of this area have been denied their right to live in peace and in security. Which is their right and the right of generations to come. It has inflamed passions to live in an area and the region where two problems now exist. One 23 years old in terms of its recent history, and another a few months old. Both characterized by territorial occupation and annexations. Both addressed by the Security Council of the United Nations and the United Nations. Yet one still waiting with us, and probably being the cause, the root cause of instability in this region, and one which has brought this great coalition to place and use the most lethal, modern concentration of equipment and men and material in modern times. I've always regretted that this was a choice, as it would appear, of many, and we are apparently living in a new era and a new world, entertaining the hopes for a new world order, I very firmly believe that such an order can only exist if all in this world contribute seriously to upholding the same principles and ideals in dealing with any problem, wherever it occurs. So let's hope that somehow we can still see this world approach this onslaught and try to bring it to a close as soon as possible. At least a halt for a period of time to enable all people of goodwill to try what has not been tried yet adequately. The approach of dialogue and diplomacy, quiet diplomacy, to bring this crisis to a satisfactory conclusion to all concerned, and to move away from it to another crisis that has been with us for many, many years, and to finally address it, and then hopefully to move in an atmosphere of peace towards the removal of weapons of mass destruction from this entire region, towards democracy and freedom, respect for human lives and human rights, peace and security for all. I hope that the present slide towards the tragic, disastrous, and the unknown be halted as soon as possible. Well, we here in Jordan are passing also through a very interesting phase of the life of this country and its people. Enjoying freedom, enjoying democracy, and in the face of such a crisis that we have never lived through before, facing it together with clarity of vision, with a sense of responsibility, and without the usual measures that governments may feel they have to adopt under far less dangerous circumstances. Of course, our hope is that what we have achieved may be an inspiration and an example to others to follow in the times to come. If somehow, by some miracle, we are able to turn the corner away from hatred and destruction and bloodletting towards peace in this region. The alternatives are what I have pointed to time and again during these last months. And I am very, very deeply saddened to see and to live through my worst fears coming true or beginning to do so. Anyway, rest assured that we have always been and will always be committed to the cause of peace, genuine peace that generations after us can accept and live with and protect. The Arab world to which we belong, Arab unity, relations based on mutual respect with the rest of the world and all in it, and fruitful cooperation and openness. Rather than proceed any further with this talk to you, I will be more than glad and happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Are you calling for a temporary ceasefire at this time? And if so, what do you think that might accomplish, considering the failure of previous diplomatic initiatives?
Well, sir, with all due respect to whoever would suggest that there was a real serious diplomatic effort, I would suggest that rather than go on this course any further, if the military actions could be brought to a halt, then maybe this would afford many of us the opportunity to really seriously try to seek a political solution, a diplomatic solution satisfactory to all, against the background that this was attainable and was possible. Even during the first 48 hours, the path was open, but unfortunately, soon thereafter it was shut. And I believe that the effort that was put into the military option was infinitely greater than anything that happened on the diplomatic and political level.
Follow-up question, if I might. Do you
Go ahead.
At this point that there is a renewed hope, a possibility of a new diplomatic initiative that might bring this to an end if there is a ceasefire?
I'm not speaking on anybody's behalf. And on the other hand, regarding even the possibility of contact with Iraq, that hasn't been possible since the beginning of hostilities. But I'm voicing my own view and that of my government, and certainly the hope of my people, and I'm sure that of people of goodwill everywhere.
Your Majesty.
The ambassador in France, in Paris, said that Jordan was not part of this conflict. Does that mean that the king of Jordan and the people of Jordan has no sympathy for one or other camp?
The people of Jordan and I have the greatest concern for the future as well as the present of this Arab world to which we belong. We have done everything we could in the past, and we will never move away from our sense of responsibility to serve the cause of peace in this entire region to the best of our ability. My conscience, and I believe this is shared with the government and people of Jordan, is clear that we have tried everything that we could in the past. but we were blocked whenever we moved and wherever we moved. And this did not happen from one side to the conflict only. It seems there was more emphasis on seeking a military option rather than letting diplomacy prevail to try to exhaust all possibilities of achieving a peaceful solution.
The Iraqi attack against Israel, and what will be the position of Jordan in the case of Israel attack Iraq through the airspace of Jordan?
So we have, as we drifted towards war, made it abundantly clear that this is a sovereign country and that we will defend our territory and airspace against any possible incursion from any side to any conflict. Our means are limited, but we are determined to do whatever we can to ensure that our airspace and land is not violated from any side to any conflict, and particularly during this very, very difficult point in time. That is our position, and it is, has been so and will continue to be so.
NATO base in the Turkey. Do you see a new quality of the aggression against Iraq, and what's your point of view about the duties of the European community towards this new development?
I see that all members of the international community can either contribute towards averting disaster within the region, beyond the region, economically, ecologically, and on the human dimension. And whoever does not do so will be involved in a way that will be judged by generations to come. And I believe it is the time to act, and act quickly, to avoid a further slide into the precipice.
Do you know that you have stated again that you will defend your airspace and your territory? Do you accept that any action that you take in doing this could in fact result in Jordan being drawn into the war and drawing other Arab countries into the war?
This is our territory, and this is our responsibility, and the sky is above it. And we regret very, very much indeed that conditions have deteriorated to the point that they have. We are deeply saddened, not only by recent events, but all the events that erupted since the beginning of hostilities, way short of having tried to achieve a political solution to the problem, and a peaceful one. So we cannot be people who duck and leave their skies to be used by any. Because the right of one side to a conflict to use it means the right of another. We have made it before the situation erupted the way it did, that with our means, all means available to us, we will try to defend our sovereignty, our territory, our airspace to the best of our ability. And I believe that this is the only thing that we could do under the circumstances.
Has crossed your airspace on the way to hit Israel. In that case, have you filed any protests with Baghdad?
As far as we are concerned, I don't know, to my knowledge, airspace is...
We interrupt this news conference with Jordan's King Hussein to take you to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia now for the Department of Defense daily military briefing at the Central Allied Command Quarters there. Today's rundown of the latest events will be conducted by Major General Robert Johnston of the United States Marine Corps. General Johnston is the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida.
Getting old enough, I need glasses. Forgive me. Let me make a few brief comments here to give you an update, and then, of course, as was indicated, open it up for questions. Today, the United States Air Force and the air components of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, along with Saudi Arabian, Kuwaiti, British, Canadian, Italian, and French Air Forces, are continuing around-the-clock operations in support of Operation Desert Storm. Emphasis continues to be placed on offensive counter-air and interdiction missions. The objectives of this large-scale interdiction airstrikes continue to be the destruction of major Iraqi military complexes, troop concentrations, air defense, long-range artillery and missile sites, and command and control elements. Additionally, today, Marine forward air controllers flying OV-10 aircraft directed United States Air Force against some active enemy artillery sites. And as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, local Riyadh time, these continuous operations around the clock have raised the total sortie count for Operation Desert Storm to over 4,000 sorties. Coalition aircraft were protected from Iraqi interceptors by Navy F-14 Tomcats, Marine F-18 Hornets, and Air Force F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons. These aircraft provided air cover during all phases of the operation. And as of 3 o'clock today, our aircraft were responsible for destroying 10 Iraqi aircraft in air-to-air combat, of which 6 were MiG-29 Fulcrums, 3 were Mirage F-1s, and we believe the 10th aircraft was a MiG-23 Flogger. Of this total, 5 have been shot down in the last 24 hours. As of today, the United States has incurred 5 aircraft losses due to enemy fire. The Navy has lost 1 FNA-18 and 2 A-6Es. The Air Force 1 F-15 Echo and 1 F-4G that was not a result of hostile fire. The Marine Corps has lost 1 OV-10. As an integral part of the air campaign, the Navy in the last 24 hours has launched over 50 conventional Tomahawk cruise missiles for a total of 150 launched to date. Turning to the Navy, and a report very recently released, last night the guided frigate, the USS Nicholas, and Army helicopters, together with a Kuwaiti patrol boat, engaged and neutralized Iraqi forces operating from Kuwaiti oil platforms in the northern Arabian Gulf. The Iraqi forces had been firing on coalition aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery and shoulder-fired SA weapons. We have taken 12 Iraqi prisoners, and they're presently aboard the Kuwaiti patrol boat and the USS Nicholas. The Iraqi soldiers will be transferred to a U.S. Marine holding facility and eventually to a POW camp. Turning to ground forces, the U.S. Army and Marine Corps continues to maintain a defensive posture within Saudi Arabia. Yesterday, an Army 7th Corps artillery unit engaged 2 SA-2 surface-to-air missile sites with 3 missiles. One site was destroyed, and damage to the other is unknown at this time. There have been no direct hostile confrontations on the ground. However, Marine units received some sporadic artillery fire and did engage them with airborne controlled airstrikes. Our ground forces continue to hone their combat skills and continue to conduct anti-aircraft weapons training, tank crew drills, field training exercises, and numerous live fire exercises. Today, there have been 3 reported launches of Iraqi surface-to-surface missiles. and all 3 of these missiles were launched towards Israel. Reports indicate at this time that 1 landed within Israel and 2 others are unaccounted for. This brings the total for the last 2 days to 11 surface-to-surface missiles fired by the Iraqis. I might make a comment here that today at 3:57 there were 2 Patriot missiles fired unintentionally from a location in Saudi Arabia. The missile firing resulted in no personal injuries or damage, and we are now investigating the cause of those launchings. Let me summarize by saying that in the last 24 hours, the U.S. has lost 3 aircraft, 1 Navy and 1 Air Force, and 1 Marine. And to date, the U.S. has lost a total of 6 aircraft, 3 Navy, 2 Air Force, 1 Marine. In the last 24 hours, our U.S. pilots have downed 5 Iraqi aircraft, and as of today, U.S. and coalition pilots have downed a total of 10 Iraqi aircraft in air-to-air combat. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a very basic rundown of where we stand today, and I'd like to open the floor up for questions.
Michael Rigby, TVAM News in London. Can you tell me how it's possible you unintentionally fired Patriot missiles, and were they the ones seen here from Riyadh?
Until we've investigated, I think it's rather difficult for me to predict and to speculate, quite frankly, on how they were launched.
Were they the ones from here that were seen?
It is my understanding that those are the ones that were seen on your video screens, yes.
Can you just confirm that they were either destroyed by yourself in the air, or what did happen to them?
They were destroyed.
Thank you. There's a report that the Iraqis are using a Texaco facility in the neutral zone as a platform for their SAMs and AAA. And could you confirm that they are using Kuwaiti oil facilities as a cover for their anti-aircraft installations?
Well, I think I was really talking about that one incident where the Navy and the Kuwaiti patrol boats actually were picked up some Iraqis who were firing from platforms.
And this is onshore in the storage area?
Those were offshore platforms.
Yeah, and this is, but I've heard a report that they are still onshore in the Texaco facility.
I cannot support that. I'd be speculating at this time. Yes, sir.
Do you know whether these the anti-aircraft or the SAM, the SA-7s that were fired from these platforms were responsible for hitting any of the aircraft that we have lost or any aircraft that we didn't lose?
Quite frankly, I really couldn't respond to that. I don't know. But clearly they were firing at aircraft, and we have eliminated that threat.
Is that information you could tell us if you knew?
If I knew, I would tell you, certainly.
How many platforms are we talking about?
I think there were 9 or 10, several. 9, I believe, is the correct number.
Only one follow-up, please.
Would these be the first POWs taken in this conflict,
yes,
to your knowledge?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about casualties on either side in the storming of the platforms and any other details of that fight that you can give us?
I do not have all the details yet. I think until we get the crews back and the POWs, it'll be pretty difficult to give you a totally clear picture. We have no casualties on our side.
No casualties, no U.S. casualties.
Yes, sir.
General, as a matter of policy, do you intend to make a distinction between prisoners of war and Iraqi defectors who give up the fight or want to stop fighting in some way?
Well, they still, of course, would be processed through a POW compound.
But would they be treated differently if they approached our forces and declared themselves to be defectors?
They'll all be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
General Charles McLean from NBC. There were only 3 Scuds fired last night, 8 the night before. Yes. Are you under the impression now that they may be running out of those mobile launchers, or have we effectively, do you think, neutralized them?
Well, I think it's difficult to say that we've neutralized them, but I think if you look at, I believe we have some expectation there are probably about 50, perhaps 30 permanent sites and maybe 20 plus that can move around, total of 50 plus. And they've gone from firing 8 on one day down to 3, and they are being targeted as a very high priority target by our air campaign. And I think it would be reasonable to expect that we have certainly caused them to have great difficulty in firing. So I think that the answer is our air campaign is having some effect on their ability to fire those missiles. It's not to say that they're all disappeared, that the threat has gone away totally.
General ITN, could you tell us how many Scuds, mobile and fixed launchers you've accounted for so far?
It's a little early to tell, quite frankly. It's until you can confirm battle damage, and there is a lot of cloud cover out there, I think I would be reluctant to say that we've killed a certain number. I think really by the fact that they're firing less at this point would give us some high confidence that we're having an effect on them with our air campaign. But I couldn't give you a head count right now. Yes, ma'am.
Have the coalition forces decided yet who will be the detaining power for POWs? Which government?
The Saudi Arabian government, as the host nation, will be ultimately responsible for the control of those POWs.
All POWs will be handed over to them.
Ultimately, they will be handled by each one of the components and eventually handled by the Saudi Arabian government. Yes, sir.
Terry Atlas from the Chicago Tribune. You referred to cloud cover. Is that continuing to obstruct targets that you're shooting at? And what effect is it having in terms of both effectiveness, success rates, and the percentage of targeted targets that are hit?
Well, I couldn't talk to percentages, but clearly it does degrade somewhat our ability to fire on targets and certainly to be able to see whatever battle damage that you've been able to inflict on those targets. But you have to appreciate that we have enormous technology that allows us to do things in the dark and under marginal weather conditions. So I think it's a fair statement to say that it has done very little to really slow down our game plan with this air campaign.
Just to follow up, but some of the poll reports report a number of planes coming back with their weapons, their missiles and bombs not discharged. So clearly a number of flights are coming back and not hitting their targets. Is that correct?
Well, I think that would be true if it was a clear day. I think historically you will find that not all aircraft can drop their bombs on the target. It can be a function of a mechanical problem with the aircraft, etc., not locating the exact target that he was assigned to. A number of reasons, not just weather, that would prevent them from firing on their targets. Yes, sir.
For Aviation Week, could you give us an idea of the type of missions that are routinely assigned to the Harriers and how well they're performing in that role?
Well, the kinds of, a Harrier is primarily a close air support system, but it can do virtually everything, and the Harriers are very much a part of this air campaign. So a wide variety of roles, really the roles that I've described for you.
Sir, it's been quite a while since this country's taken POWs. For those who may not know, what eventually happens to them? Are they freed at some point in time? Are they allowed to go where they want? Or
well, I would hope at the end of the war that there would be obviously the logical repatriation of POWs in accordance with, strictly in accordance with the Geneva Convention.
I'm also wondering, based on your own experience in fighting, what impact, if any, is television having on anything that you may or may not be doing? You're getting instant everything, whereas in the past that just wasn't the case. Is it hampering your ability to do what you want to do? Is it helping it?
Well, I think it's probably a wash. Quite frankly, there's a good deal of circular reporting that comes up from the media, and it's always, in our best judgment, the thing to do is to make sure that we can validate it on the ground. So there has been a lot of speculative reporting that has to be put to bed by us confirming it by the actual events themselves. So it complicates things a little bit, but I think in the balance, it's a wash, really.
Excuse me. A senior Saudi official told the BBC earlier today that he believed the Iraqis no longer had the capacity to hit major Saudi population centers using their long-range missiles, and he said the only place they could hit was Hafr al-Batten. What's your reaction to that? And if the Saudis are saying this sort of thing, would you tell us if they did fire a missile at Riyadh?
Would I tell you if they were firing at Riyadh? Well, yes, certainly we would. I think it's a little premature. We're only 36 hours into the campaign, and to make an assumption that we have totally eliminated all of his capabilities, including the ability to fire Scuds. I think that the trend shows that they've gone from 8 to 3, and we're attacking his Scud targets with great energy. And I think that is perhaps the best protection against the Scud launches. But I can't say that we've eliminated that threat.
Sir?
I have this gentleman here.
Mohammed from Kuwait Television.
Could you tell us more about the USS Nicholas and the Kuwait Patrol port?
I can't give you the details of that. We have, again, an initial report of the outcome of that and the fact that we have picked up some Iraqi POWs, and we've eliminated that surface-to-air threat to our air forces. And until we recover the crews and get a full report, I really couldn't give you any more details. Okay, I think over here. Yes, sir.
A little bit more about those oil platforms. What units were used? How long did it take? And the platforms were far from the Kuwaiti coast, and we will have any other attacks on other platforms?
I can't give you the exact distance, but there were some miles offshore Kuwait, and as we said, 9 different platforms. And I cannot give you the details of exactly how we attacked those platforms specifically. That'll have to wait until we get a full account of exactly how they eliminated that threat.
One more question.
And I cannot say that there are no more enemy forces out on other platforms, but I can assure you that that's part of our mission, is to make sure that we eliminate all threats to our friendly aircraft. Yes, sir, right here.
So Richard Ellis from the Sunday Times. When the land battle comes, what's your assessment on how far you'll have to strike inside Iraq?
Well, I think that's, this is going to be a long campaign, if need be. It'll be done with great caution and very professionally, and with the objective of minimizing our friendly casualties. And I think it would be very speculative for me to say, when the campaign starts and how far we would have to go. I think it's too early in the game to look that far ahead.
When you say long, what does long mean?
I would not put any limit on that. It will be as long as we need to satisfy the mission given to us by the President. And I think you have to wait to see on the battlefield exactly how long that's going to be. I would not predict. There's no timeline that we have established.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Particularly in the region.
One more question.
Some of your allies, particularly in this region, have expressed concerns that if this extends for many months, they face certain social problems. Can you give assurances to, for example, the Saudi Arabians that this is not going to extend for 6 months or for 3 more months?
Well, I don't think there's any guarantee how long it'll be, how short or how long. We are prosecuting a very carefully planned, very detailed campaign plan that we will execute according to our schedule. And we have imposed or not even suggested any particular time frame. Thank you. I know you have a million questions, and I regret that I have to go 24-hour operations and I need to get back to my appointed post. But I appreciate the opportunity to share some update with you. Sir.
You've been listening to Major General Robert Johnston of the United States Marine Corps and the Central Allied Command in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, giving the daily DoD military briefing. We'll be back in a moment to debrief our correspondents at the Pentagon and in Riyadh and also in Saudi Arabia in just a few minutes. But Bob first has this news update. Bob.
We apologize also, Bobby, for having had to interrupt the news conference by Jordan's King Hussein in Amman to bring you the military briefing from Riyadh, but the press of events seemed to dictate that. During the course of his meeting with the press corps in Amman, King Hussein talked at some length about Jordanian airspace, Jordanian sovereignty. He did this in light of the apparent firing of Scud missiles from Iraq to Israel and the possibility, which has been raised, that Israeli planes might overfly Jordan, which blocks the path between Iraq and Israel, should they retaliate. When asked what Jordan would do if his airspace were violated, King Hussein had this response.
As we drifted towards war, made it abundantly clear that this is a sovereign country and that we will defend our territory and airspace against any possible incursion from any side to any conflict. Our means are limited, but we are determined to do whatever we can to ensure that our airspace and land is not violated from any side to any conflict, and particularly during this very, very difficult point in time.
King Hussein seemed to be sending a message to Israel that Israeli warplanes should not overfly Jordanian airspace. Asked by a reporter what Jordan's response would be to Iraq's having fired Scud missiles over his country, the king said that, to the best of his knowledge, he had no knowledge of that having happened. Bobby?
CNN's Gene Randall was monitoring the military briefing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia that we carried for you just a few minutes ago. Let's check in with him now and see if he has more details of these developments today. Gene?
Bobby, just some notes on what I picked out of that briefing, which I found to be of significance. First of all, the number of air sorties against Iraqi targets, both inside Iraq proper and Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. 4,000 sorties, single missions, 4,000 single missions since Thursday, and that is quite a pace indeed. Over the past 24 hours, coalition pilots have downed 5 Iraqi warplanes. We got that from the briefing. And so far, a total of 10 Iraqi planes have been knocked down. And it is perhaps important to note that 9 of those planes were either MiG-29, Soviet-made state-of-the-art jet aircraft, or French Mirage, and once again, some very fine airplanes. In the last 24 hours, the United States has lost 3 aircraft for a total of 6. So far, 3 Navy planes have been lost, 1 Marine aircraft and 2 Air Force, although one of the Air Force planes, an F-4, was lost for non-hostile reasons. The question of prisoners of war arose in the briefing. The United States now has 12 Iraqi prisoners of war. They were taken in the North Arabian Gulf last night. We were told they were using artillery and surface-to-air missiles against U.S.-led coalition aircraft in the area. They are now in the hands of U.S. forces. Ultimately, we're told, they'll be turned over to the Saudi Arabians, Saudi Arabia being the host country for Operation Desert Storm. On the very important question of Scud missile sites, General Johnston said the U.S. air campaign, is affecting Iraq's ability to fire those Scud missiles, but that the threat is certainly still there. He said it has not been neutralized. However, he drew comfort from the fact that in the first night of missile attacks on Israel, 8 Scud missiles were fired. The second night, last night, the number was down to 3. But clearly, that threat still exists. But once again, it is quite a pace of air sorties against Iraqi targets, 4,000 since Thursday. Bobby?
All right, Gene, thanks. Let's swing back to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia now, where Greg Lamont was in attendance at that briefing a few moments ago. Greg, perhaps you can shed more light on this POW issue for us.
Well, what had happened was that, again, straightening it all out here, the guided missile frigate USS Nicholas, along with some U.S. helicopters and a Kuwaiti patrol boat, came into contact with some oil platforms, and on those oil platforms were Iraqi soldiers. They were firing anti-aircraft missiles, and they also had shoulder surface-to-air missiles. We aren't aware of any kind of battle that has taken place. Apparently, the details are still being sorted out, but after all was said and done, 12 Iraqi prisoners were taken into custody, and as we found out tonight, they are the first POWs in the conflict with Iraq. Those prisoners now aboard the USS Nicholas. At some point in time, they will be transferred to a Marine compound, and they will be treated as POWs. As I pointed out to the general in the briefing, he said that, again, these are the first POWs taken. I said, what do we do with POWs these days? And he said that they will stay in our custody until the end of the war, and at some point in time, they'll be returned to their own country. So, again, 12 Iraqis taken into custody, the first POWs of this conflict. On another note, which became interesting to us here where we are located, this afternoon, about 3:55, we got a call from a woman who was somewhat frantic. She said that she was sitting by her pool and that she looked up in the sky and all of a sudden saw 2 missiles in the air. We asked her what she saw. She explained that the missiles went up this way and then went sideways. She said that a lot of smoke behind, that she didn't quite know what was going on. She's never seen missiles fired in this area before. She gave us some names of other people who live in the area. We gave them a call, and indeed they had seen the same thing. Initially, we thought that they might have been cruise missiles based on the pattern that they went into. And the military, we came into contact with, asked them about it. They didn't know anything about it at that time. But as it turns out, there were indeed 2 missile firings from this air base near where we're located. That surprised most of us because we're unaware that there were any, that the air base was capable of firing missiles. And as it turns out, they were Patriot missiles, the kind that used the other night in Dhahran to shoot down a Scud missile. So what they told us, though, was that they were unintentional firings, and right now they're trying to determine why in the world they got fired in the first place. Greg Lamont, CNN Live, Saudi Arabia.
All right, now let's move elsewhere in Saudi Arabia to where CNN's Charles Jaco is at the military pool headquarters. It is nighttime, we see, in Saudi Arabia. And Charles, one of the things that Gene mentioned at the Pentagon a few minutes ago, 4,000 sorties a day, just an incredible amount of air activity.
Just an incredible amount indeed. As a matter of fact, over the past 18 to 24 hours, at the runways around the air bases near here, there have been takeoffs and landings almost every minute. C-130 propeller-driven transport planes, C-141 jet transport planes, Tornado and F-15 fighter bombers. In fact, we have a C-130 that just landed behind us. As we understand it, the F-15s and Tornadoes are on an accelerated strike schedule, so the pilots are landing, getting new fuel, getting new armaments, and taking off again. So apparently, and we say apparently, the level of strikes and the frequency of strikes against Iraq and Kuwait has definitely accelerated in the past 12 to 24 hours. What's interesting is there was some talk about the cloud cover. The weather here has been kind of foggy, damp. There's been a lot of haze in the air, and the briefers indicated that the cloud cover and the haze was presenting a bit of a problem, not for the so-called smart weapons that are pre-targeted at pre-positioned targets, but for manual targets. For example, if you're going after a mobile Scud missile launcher, you have to see it before you can hit it. That may have presented a problem because, as one of the questioners at the Riyadh briefing mentioned, we have received several pool reports from journalists in the Pentagon pools with the Air Forces that a lot of the planes have come back with full bomb racks and full rocket racks. They have not unloaded, and one of the problems is apparently they can't see, in some cases, these mobile Scud launchers in order to go after them. But we're assured here that going after those Scud missile launchers is probably the top priority of all these airstrikes now. And as I said, these airstrikes continue at what seems to be an accelerated pace. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Well, in the midst of all of this military activity, there is, lest we forget, opposition to those very hostilities in the Gulf back here in the United States. Frank Sesno joins us now from the White House, where there are a number of demonstrators outside. Frank?
Bobby, outside the gates of the White House, there are indeed a number of demonstrators. They have been arriving all morning long. We've been watching them. I was told earlier today that there are expectations there could be, by the end of this whole thing, 40 to 50,000 of them. I think that very much remains to be seen how many show up, but apparently several groups have been involved in organizing this protest. They're not very far from here, just across the street from the White House. They could be seen from the residence if the president were there to look out. He's not, and I'm going way out on a limb here, but I might suggest it's one reason he's going up to Camp David this weekend. This demonstration has been anticipated for some time. In fact, some within the White House staff and others have been carrying gas masks. We got warnings earlier on this week that there is the remote possibility that there could be some trouble and all the rest, and everybody's been preparing for that too. But what in fact occurs here, we'll have to see throughout the course of the day. There has been a small vigil throughout the week, really, just across the street, a pounding of the drum and a few signs that have said no war for oil. But this is a more vocal and larger gathering here today. If you'll permit the observation, at times somewhat ragtag grouping of people here, also those who are well-dressed, all of them committed, they say, against the war underway currently in the Persian Gulf. Again, President Bush at Camp David today. He will be there throughout this long holiday weekend. It's Martin Luther King's officially observed birthday on Monday. It's a holiday, therefore, and he will be receiving a briefing from his Pentagon advisors up there at the camp as well, the Vice President, the Chief of Staff, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, and also the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell. President Bush conducting his business from far away today. I'm Frank Sesno, CNN, reporting live from the White House.
Among those keeping up with the U.S. military briefing this morning in Riyadh and keeping up generally with developments in the Persian Gulf War, CNN military affairs analyst James Blackwell. We'll talk with him in a moment.